This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 995 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by DraftKings, thanks for tuning in. Football season's right around the corner. There's no better way to lock in your fantasy dominance early than with Best Ball on DraftKings, where you draft once and ride your roster all season long. And right now, DraftKings is giving all customers a can't-miss offer. Draft one, get one. Enter a lineup in the $15 million Best Ball contest for just $20, and you'll score another Best Ball ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million, giving you a second shot to win big. It's easy. Just draft your team once, no weekly management required, and let your top scorers automatically start each week. Across the whole season, every breakout star, every clutch play, every touchdown will count toward your quest for a share of $15 million. As you know, I'm drafting over there, and I'm documenting things with becoming a Best Ball bro. So you can use that information from that show to help you out as well. So download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now to draft your $20 Best Ball lineup to play for a share of $15 million and get a second ticket to play for free. That's two chances to win big without ever setting your lineup again. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 18 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. One per customer. Enter the Best Ball $15 million headliner contest by 9/4/25 to get one bonus entry. $20 entry fee required. Reward expires in 30 days. See terms at DraftKings.com/NFL-best-ball. Sponsored by DK. So I've been doing research for the draft guide, and that launches in less than a month, by the way. But I've been doing my research for the draft guide, and recently I completed the quarterback research for the guide. I analyzed average draft position trends, I looked at the optimal strategy for 2025, all that good stuff. And for any of you who bought the guide in previous seasons, I can assure you that this year's version has a whole new way of breaking things down. A better way, in my opinion. Now, I've got my favorite targets, my favorite avoids at the position this year. But as I was doing my research, I couldn't help but think that it feels like we're on the cusp of the year of the sophomore quarterback. Last season, we saw an unprecedented 6 quarterbacks get drafted in the top 12 of the NFL draft. It's a number that we just don't see. Expectations for that 2024 draft class, just based on draft capital, were really high. Thus far, from a fantasy perspective, Jayden Daniels is looking like he's on his way to be the next elite quarterback in fantasy. He's being ranked there already. Bo Nix had an awesome rookie season in Denver, and then there's plenty of upside with Caleb Williams, Drake Maye, even JJ McCarthy and Michael Penix. I think a lot of people can look at this crop and say that good things are coming. But I want to use today's episode to show you the why. Why I think this 2025 season could really be a year where we see many of them, if not all of them, outperform their average draft position expectation. My plan today is just go second-year quarterback by second-year quarterback, giving you a historical trend or two that's helped predict future breakouts. And by the end, I hope you're seeing what I'm seeing, that nearly every one of these guys, they seem undervalued right now. Let's just start with Jayden Daniels. The quarterback position has gotten a whole lot more predictive over the last 5 or 6 years. I've said it year after year on this show, but I think a big part of that was Lamar Jackson's 2019 season where he just completely broke fantasy football. He was a later round quarterback that year, but he also showed the fantasy football consensus how absolutely vital rushing is for fantasy purposes. And when you get that combination of good passing numbers with good rushing numbers, amazing things happen. Some people still seem to think that I'm late round quarterback or bust. That couldn't be further from the truth. I've touted early round quarterbacking plenty in the draft guide through the 3 years of doing it. Now about to be 4 years. Because the same dudes are giving you the same edge year over year. There's a predictability angle to the top of the position. You can't find that elsewhere. It's Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, and now, potentially, Jayden Daniels. This goes back to the idea of the pocket passer trap, the episode that I did last year that I threw back in the podcast feed recently as a rewind episode. With the pocket passer trap, the guys you should be really afraid of in the early rounds are the ones who aren't giving you a whole lot of upside with their mobility, because rushing is sticky year over year. Passing isn't. Since 2014, using Fantasy Data's ADP, there have been 57 qualified quarterbacks drafted in the top 6 of fantasy drafts. Qualified means that they played 8 or more games in the analyzed season, as well as 8 in the previous season. Now, I bucketed those quarterbacks by how they scored in rushing fantasy points per game the previous season. So points coming from only rushing. We've got a bucket for 2 or fewer points per game, another one for 2 to 5, and then one over 5 points per game. Those buckets include 22, 18, and 17 quarterbacks respectively. The quarterbacks in the most mobile bucket, the ones who scored 5 or more points per game in the previous season, they give you by far the best hit rates the following season. 82% of them scored 20 or more points per game in that following season. That number is just 41% for the immobile quarterbacks, and it's 50% for the quarterbacks who are somewhere in the middle. And when you look at 21 or more points per game or 22 or more points per game, the same trend exists. If you're curious about all that data, it's going to be in the draft guide this year. Now, Jayden Daniels last year, he was comfortably over that 5 points per game mark with his legs. Judging by history, that gives him an 82% chance to go over the 20 point per game mark this year. That would allow him to exceed expectation. Now, I do think that you could argue that Daniels shouldn't be drafted ahead of someone like Jalen Hurts. Hurts has been so stable over the last handful of years because of his rushing touchdown totals. But there's no doubt in my mind that Daniels belongs in the top 4 this year in fantasy. There's so much upside, and there's a floor that we know exists, not just because he's good at football, but because history tells us so. Now, no one's going to really argue that. We're all pretty bullish on Jayden Daniels. Where I think things get more interesting is with the next tier of players, the next tier of second-year quarterbacks. And that generally includes Bo Nix, Caleb Williams, and probably Drake Maye. When you're not getting an elite quarterback in fantasy, that means you're getting someone in the middle or later rounds. You're generally drafting a quarterback in that QB 7 to QB 18 range, let's say. I've got to tell you guys, second-year quarterbacks in that range, the range where we see Nix, Williams, and Maye this year, second-year quarterbacks in that range have historically been unbelievable versus their average draft position cost. Now, I keep bringing up average draft position expectation, or as I just said, average draft position cost. All that means is what we're expecting from a player in points per game at a certain ADP. I lay this out every year in the draft guide as well, but let me give you a little refresher. I take average draft position data since 2014. I look at where a player was drafted and how many points per game he actually scored. And a player needs to have played 8 or more games to qualify here. Next, I find trend lines based on all of that data. Those trend lines show us expectation, or how many points per game we expect from a player at a certain ADP. When looking at the QB 7 to QB 18 range historically, second-year quarterbacks have dominated against expectation. Now, sample sizes are smaller here, so take all of this with a grain of salt. But there have been 13 second-year quarterbacks drafted between QB 7 and QB 18 since 2014. Again, minimum 8 games played. Of those 13, they've had an average point per game differential versus expectation of plus 2.3, meaning the random second-year quarterback has outperformed ADP expectation by 2.3 points per game. For context, no other grouping, whether you're looking at year 3 quarterbacks, year 11 or later quarterbacks, year 7 to 10 quarterbacks, no other group has exceeded expectation on average by more than half a point. Second-year quarterbacks are at plus 2.3 points. And that's not like Lamar Jackson's second season just completely skewing this data. They have by far the best rate of exceeding expectation or outperforming by 0 or more points, 2 or more points, and 4 or more points. It's not even close either. Again, we can scream small sample size all we want, and it wouldn't be totally wrong. But something that's been consistent in my research for years now is how the market generally runs away from ambiguity. Whether it's a backfield that seems crowded or a young player who just hasn't broken out yet. Fantasy managers, they prefer comfort and they prefer safety, but they generally shouldn't. So that's a huge thumbs up for Williams, Nix, and Maye in particular, since those three quarterbacks fit within this ADP criteria. JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix, they don't, but we'll get to them in a second. Now, we know that rushing production is really big for quarterbacks. I got some really insane data in this year's guide about it, but previous season rushing points per game isn't only important for the quarterbacks going in the early rounds of drafts. Let's go back to those same buckets that we talked about earlier. Less than 2 points per game in the previous season, 2 to 5 points per game via the rush in the previous season, or 5 or more points per game. In this QB 7 to QB 18 range, the quarterbacks who are in that less than 2 bucket, they generally outperform expectation worst, even after the high-end quarterbacks are off the board. And thankfully, each of our quarterbacks were well above that mark, even Caleb Williams, who didn't have a rushing touchdown last year. Once again, it's a trend that favors these sophomore quarterbacks. And then there's the touchdown rate thing too. High touchdown rates often elevate quarterbacks in ADP the following season, even though touchdown rate regresses. I mentioned last week on the mailbag episode how top 18 quarterbacks by ADP who had 200 or more pass attempts the previous season, of the players with a 6% or better touchdown rate in that previous season, not a single one exceeded ADP expectation by 4 or more points per game the following year. Meanwhile, when looking at the bucket of players with a touchdown rate under 4%, you get a rate of exceeding ADP expectation by 4 or more points of 17.4%. Everyone else, the large bucket of quarterbacks with touchdown rates between 4 and 6%, they were much better than the high touchdown rate group. They just weren't quite as good against expectation as the guys who had a touchdown rate the previous season under 4%. Caleb Williams was under that 4% mark last year. Drake Maye was just above it at 4.4%. And while Bo Nix did have a higher end touchdown rate, it was still just 5.1%. It wasn't close to that 6% threshold. So we've got these middle to late round quarterbacks who are second year guys. That's a big boost historically. They also bring a little bit of rushing upside. And then none of them are coming off of seasons with unsustainable touchdown rates. All three of those quarterbacks, Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, Drake Maye, they all seem undervalued in drafts right now. And then there's JJ McCarthy and Michael Penix. Now, honestly, when it comes to the predictive stuff against ADP, the stuff the market just doesn't seem to factor in enough, Michael Penix is a tougher sell than JJ McCarthy. Last year, Penix ran for 3, 3, and 5 yards during his 3 games with significant passing volume. While he did have a rushing touchdown, he's not someone who's going to blow up with rushing upside, more than likely. Now, one of the key insights that I found in this year's guide is that among late round quarterbacks, the guys selected after QB 18, oftentimes going undrafted, fantasy points per dropback is a pretty fun metric to focus on. That metric's one that naturally correlates pretty well to fantasy production the following season. But the market, it largely captures the upside with it until you hit the later rounds. Now, I'm using PFF data for dropbacks, and my fantasy points per game numbers are based on scoring that gives 4 points per touchdown pass and -2 points per interception. But since 2014, late round quarterbacks who were over 0.45 fantasy points per dropback in their previous season, they tend to give us far better performance against expectation. Michael Penix wasn't there. He wasn't terrible within the metric, especially for a rookie, but he wasn't great. His sample size is also pretty small. JJ McCarthy, he obviously had a small sample size too because he didn't play last year. However, you know who was a beast within that metric last season? Sam Darnold. You know what system Sam Darnold played in? The one JJ McCarthy is walking into. That system has watched Vikings quarterbacks rank in the top half of the league in 2 of the last 3 years in fantasy points per dropback. And McCarthy might have more rushing upside than people are giving him credit for. He wasn't close to a 0 in college as a rusher. So Jayden Daniels, probably part of that elite group now, checking the box of previous season rushing points per game. Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, and Drake Maye, they each have rushing upside. They're each second-year quarterbacks in that middle to late round range. That's provided a ton of upside in the past. And none of them had some sort of outlier touchdown rate last year. And when I can't pinpoint a singular ADP trend to give me a huge thumbs up for Michael Penix, that doesn't mean I'm going to avoid him. There's just no ADP trends that naturally fit him. JJ McCarthy, he has a system that's provided strong fantasy points per dropback numbers in the past. And he may give us a little bit more rushing upside than we expect. We obviously can't guarantee that though. Now, there are a lot of other quarterbacks that I like in fantasy drafts this year, but there's no doubt in my mind that I'll be heavily targeting these sophomores. I mean, I already am in best ball drafts. And I doubt that's going to change dramatically when these regular season-long leagues really start up. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you had subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Thanks for listening, everyone. Becoming a Best Ball Bro, that's going to be out tomorrow, so look out for that. I've got another Perspectives episode then at the end of the week. And don't forget that the Late Round Fantasy Football Show, it's happening now each week over on YouTube. That's youtube.com/@LateRoundFF. We go live every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. It's a lot of fun. Check it out. Go subscribe there. Don't miss it. There's a whole lot of content happening, and I appreciate you consuming it. I'll talk to you tomorrow.